Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We do hope you're keeping very, very safe and well. Thank you ever so much for joining us. If you're listening to the show for the first time, you find us on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on Twitter at Last Word on Spurs. We're on Facebook and Instagram too. And yes, fashionably late, my sincere apologies. These shows are getting later and later at the moment, so please accept my apologies. But it will be worth the wait. And I'm not putting any pressure on at all at the wonderful guests we have joining us here on Last Word on Spurs. We've been blessed to have a lot of the Spurs journalists come and give us their thoughts across the summer. And that hasn't stopped there on Last Word on Spurs. We're absolutely delighted to welcome back to the show a man that has been around the globe with this football team, and he's still got a full head of hair. Can you believe it? And I think hopefully you'll be enjoying a bit of I think it's a potch ball. My God, Ange ball. What would I have done to myself then? We've got the wonderful Tom Barclay, senior football writer at The Sun. Tom, loves you on Last Word on Spurs. How are you, my friend? You okay?
I'm great. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Ricky. I don't know if it was the same for you while we're a little bit late, but we were just having a chat off air that it was our kids that were taking our time up tonight. I don't know if it was you trying to get your kids down, but I definitely had a bit of an issue with that one. Poor Mrs. trying to get the baby number 2 down at the moment, but good to be here.
Absolutely. It's a team effort, Tom, across the households, right? Team effort.
Certainly is.
I've got to say that in case I won't be able to get on here again. So it's definitely a team effort. Tom, lovely to have you on Last Word on Spurs. Fair to say, I think the last time you joined us, so much has happened. We've changed. I think we've had 3 managers since you've last been on. We've lost the key striker that we will definitely come on to. We won't make that the headline topic for now. But yeah, like I say, it's been a really, really interesting summer. One that you've been really, really closely following, obviously, to Tottenham. So before I ask you about the pre-season, I have to probably ask you about Spurs' new head coach. He's not as new as what he was, 5-6 weeks ago. So we've got to know more about the man. I want to already say he seems to be forming a real connection with the Spurs fan base, and that's Ange Postecoglou. So what have you made up of the man, Tom? Up close, personal, been in his pressers? Tell me your thoughts on him.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying the second time being on. The first time, I literally only just been covering Spurs for a few months. So it's been a little bit longer into this job now, sort of a year on. So I feel a bit more, if not part of the furniture, then a bit more of a, know what I'm doing, what's going on at Spurs a little bit more than I did maybe a year ago. And yeah, Ange Postecoglou, I think he's someone who is exactly what the doctor ordered after Antonio Conte and everything that came with him and everything that happened with his meltdown and the fact that the fans were so disenfranchised by the end. Conte didn't really want to be there. What was needed for Spurs was someone who did want to be there, someone who played entertaining football, someone who was going to be a bit of a rebuilder of teams. That's clear. I mean, I know we're not going to mention Harry yet, but obviously he's the big change. But it's not just him. There are other players that have moved on or will probably move on. And I think his approach to quickly rebuilding teams, as he showed at Celtic and other clubs in the past, was the exact kind of manager that Tottenham needed. And as regards sort of him personally, the time that I've spent with him, I suppose, from the press conferences on pre-season tour or since then, and particularly during pre-season when we got a chance to have a good sort of 40-minute sit down with him. Yeah, he comes across kind of how he does in his press conferences. Really, he's a really really warm guy, despite not being one for small talk. He definitely doesn't seem to be one, ahead of press conferences, he generally head down, waiting to get on with things. But once he starts, holding court and recounting his stories or talking about, the thing that he loves, which is football, he's so passionate about the game, which was clear from the last press conference where he talked about him. This is the first time he's not been able to be part of a fantasy football group because he is a Premier League manager now, and how he used to play Football Manager, and he used to have all the magazines growing up in Australia, which were really hard to come by because football wasn't a big thing out there. Still really isn't, but definitely wasn't back in the 70s and 80s when he was growing up. That passion really comes through, but also it's not just that. I mean, we could all have passion for the game, but he is so fitting with what he's done so far. It's only been one game, but what I've seen so far, I think he's perfect for the job.
I've got to ask you, Tom, obviously you was in the Antonio press conferences. I want to know from your perspective, what's the main difference? What's the journalist chat, you and the guys there, the likes of Ali, of course, that you speak to, Dan, of course. What's the main intricate differences for you? Because it just feels like from the outside looking in, you guys just ask a question, you get the answer, which is, it does seem that should be straightforward logic, that should happen, but it hasn't always been the case. And the most polite way I say that, there's no real, at the moment, I know it's only been fairly early, we had, 3 or 4 of his press conferences, but we don't get much cryptic. It seems fairly straight to the point. Is that fair for me to say that?
Yeah, that is quite an accurate assessment, I think. It's early days, and maybe at this point, I don't know if he cares, but it might be the fact that it's in his best interest to sort of keep us on side. I mean, I've just sort of waxed lyrical about him, so clearly it's working if that's the case. But to be honest, Antonio, his press conferences were good. Like, from a journalist point of view, like completely taking out any kind of caring about Tottenham. You just want to get a good story or a good line from a press conference. He was great for that, and he spoke at length. He did often repeat himself at times, and sometimes what you call filibustering, where you just talk for the sake of it to get out of having to answer a question, which is kind of what you're alluding to. Whereas I feel like Ange is very eloquent, very concise, but he will speak at length. But pretty much every word that's said has a point to it, and there's a reason for it. And yeah, a good example of him cutting to the chase and being quite open and honest about things is when in the last press conference, in the bit you probably won't have seen because it was in the embargo bit.
Yep.
Although I don't know if that actually goes out or not, but it might have done. I'm not sure. But anyway, Matt Barlow at the Daily Mail, my colleague, followed up on something that Ange had said in the open broadcast bit, where Ange had said that he'd been planning for this for a while about Harry leaving, and Matt said, so asked him, did you know pretty much from the day you took over that he was going to go? And a lot of managers could have been quite cryptic about that, but he said, yeah, pretty much. That was literally his response, and that was a good line from our point of view. But it was quite, it was nice to hear. It was very open and honest from that point of view. Having said that, he never said that in the lead up, since when Harry was here, that he knew that. Obviously, he wouldn't say that. So
no.
There's only so much he is going to reveal his hand. But so far, he does feel what he can say to journalists and therefore fans is pretty honest. It's good.
Yeah. I promise I will, obviously, towards the end of the show, ask you about Harry. I'm just conscious that it feels like, Tom, from Spurs fans, just as we kind of mingle and we speak to that, it feels like fans already want to move on fairly quickly, which to me, I do understand that. But there's another part that thinks to me, the guy is still the greatest player of the modern era, and the goals he scored were still most certainly worth, 100% discussing and obviously, relatable with. So I promise I'll ask you about Harry, because again, obviously he featured quite a lot on pre-season, and he was in and around his presence, although maybe not with the opportunity to maybe want to ask the questions that you wanted to ask. But talking about that subject, obviously you did follow the club very, very closely during pre-season. Just keen to know your thoughts on that, because obviously there was real upset the club didn't obviously play in Thailand. We've got a lot of followers from obviously Thailand that listen and watch Last Word on Spurs, and they were very, very excited about the prospect of Spurs playing out there. But overall, how would you rate the tour as a whole, you being there as an experience?
What do you mean in terms of how much I enjoyed it or got from it, or how useful it was?
We can do a bit of both. You tell me. So how much did you enjoy it, and then what did you think from a?
I enjoyed it. Yeah, I mean, it's a privilege to be able to go and do these kind of things. Although I had just been in Georgia for 3 weeks with the England under-21 team, so
it's a hard life, Tom. It's a hard life.
Yeah, although back to what we were talking about at the start about our families, I don't think my missus was too happy that back for 3 days and off I went again. But it was a fun tour to be able to, privileged to be able to go to that side of the world. And from a journalist point of view, there was plenty of stuff we got out of it, not just interviews, which I can talk about in a second, which some of them were absolutely great. But even that game that got rained off, yeah, that's really disappointing from a fan's point of view. And it is sad that haved, but that was almost like quite an interesting story in itself. Like, obviously the Harry thing was hanging over the whole of the tour. Son wasn't fit for the first game, for example, and suddenly, and the Roma game obviously got changed to a local team, so that wasn't ideal either. And so suddenly, the rain in Thailand, cancels that match against Leicester, and it's not like chaos, but it's not definitely not an ideal sort of tour from Spurs' point of view. But that made for quite an interesting story. And again, after that Lion City Sailors game, I asked him, this hasn't really been ideal, has it? And back to your question a minute ago about how honest he was, he could have easily sort of battered that away. But he was like, yeah, not really. But that's just, you're having to roll with the punches. And I think that honesty there's a lot of reasons why people are sort of warming to him quite quickly, but that is a big part of it, I would say. But yeah, back to, just reflecting on the tour, a few more sort of standout moments. So there were only, there were 5 of us in Perth. There was Ali Gold, who needs no introduction. I don't know if he's watching, but he'll enjoy that. Matt Barlow, who I mentioned again from the Daily Mail, Charlie Eccleshare, Athletic, and James Gilbrand from the Times. And then he left later. It was just the 4 of us who were on the. Simon Collins as well from the Standard, and the other 4 of us were on the second leg in Asia. And it was jam packed, just like it was in Seoul last year, with lots of opportunities to speak to players. The way it often works is only one of us or maybe 2 of us will go and do the player interview, but then sort of share the quotes around. Just often there'll be things happen at the same time. Like I remember Charlie and Ali, I think, went to do Pedro Porro at Perth Zoo. Not sure that's come out yet, that interview. It might do. Whilst Matt and I went and did Christian Romero in Children's Hospital in Perth. And that interview in particular was very revealing, very interesting. We pushed him quite a lot, to be honest, on a few things, but particularly this suggestion that a lot of fans seemed to have in their minds that he preferred playing for Argentina than Tottenham. And I know a lot of that might come down to the fact that he sort of effectively it seemed from the outside like he cried off those last few games before the World Cup with injury. Obviously he's had not the greatest disciplinary record on the pitch, and that was a feeling that a lot of fans seem to get. So we put that to him, and he absolutely hit back on that. Said, if you think like that, you don't know me at all. He revealed he'd had offers from other clubs and turned them down, and he wanted to spend his best years at Tottenham. And I know my following on Spurs is sort of growing, but it's not huge. But I know that Ali and Charlie, when they put that interview out, got a lot of feedback from Spurs fans. And it seems to sort of almost change the narrative around Christian a little bit on that. And fans seem to sort of appreciate that, he does genuinely want to play for Tottenham. And now he's the co-vice captain along with James Maddison. So that was, I'd like to think from a Tottenham point of view and from Romero's point of view, that interview was very worthwhile, but it was really good stuff for us, and hopefully the fans enjoyed it too. And then there was the Eric Dyer interview, which will last long in the memory for me, because I was the one who's doing it. And I knew I wanted to ask him about Dele, amongst other things. But obviously that Dele interview, which personally I think is the most powerful football interview I've ever watched. Just, so sad, but just, from a journalist point of view, there were so many sort of revealing things that within that interview. And obviously he mentioned Eric, and we all know about his, their friendship anyway, but he mentioned him quite a few times. So I felt like I wanted to ask him about it. And he did know that I was going to ask about it, amongst other things, but I only had 10 minutes with him, and I kind of brought it up straight away. And I'm not sure if he'd quite processed what he'd been thinking about Dele, and maybe wasn't expecting me to come straight in with it. He broke down in tears, and it took him quite a while to really sort of say what he wanted to say on the subject. Essentially, the main sort of part of that was him saying that he felt bad. He felt sad and disappointed in himself that he couldn't have done more, perhaps, for Dele. But the thing that really tipped him over the edge was how I was kind of saying, Dele kept saying what a great guy you are and how you helped him and all that kind of thing.
Ali's always watching you, Tom Barclay.
You are, Ali. It's scary. At least you haven't texted me. But
there you go. Wonderful Ali goals here.
And he said that. So it was the point about, I put it to him that, Dele had said what a basically great bloke Eric was. And I think that was the moment where he felt frustrated, because he was trying to say what a great guy Dele is. It's not one way. And he was talking about his wedding, because obviously Eric got married recently. And he said that.
Isn't that just typical, isn't it? We get to the crux with Tom there. We will try and get Tom back in a second because, like I say, fascinating stuff. Look, I think that for all of us, that Dele Alli interview was one that, yeah, from an emotional perspective, it really did rock us all. A player that offered so much, of course, for Tottenham, a guy that we hold very, very dear to our hearts. I think what we all just hope sincerely is that we do see Dele Alli back to playing some of the form that we know he can show. There was actually a lovely, I don't know if you guys saw it at the weekend, there was a lovely, I would say, in the most politest way, lovely display that Everton put on for Dele Alli. And honestly, you just sincerely Everton or elsewhere, we do him back in the first shirt because, quite honestly, I'd say it's back sensational. Yeah, so I think we are going to try and get Tom back. Give me 1 second. We will try and get Tom back. But yeah, I think, look, if we're going to be diving in with Tom, of course, we're going to be discussing, of course, the summer transfer window, what Spurs are ideally looking to do between now and the end of it. And ultimately, really, I think there's a feeling that we all know there's still a lot of work Tottenham need to do between now and the end of this transfer window. There's a feeling, I'm sure, across the fan base that we still do need, ideally, another centre-back. I think when you look at Spurs defensively at the moment, that in reality, it's been, even defensively at the weekend, we know there definitely is holes to fill. So for Spurs generally, let's hope they do get them filled. I think, look, Destiny Udogie, I think at the weekend really showed us some real promise down, of course, that left-hand side that, we all sincerely hope he is now the long-term answer for Tottenham Hotspur, because we've seen various players come in and ultimately not really work out. So we all hope, fingers crossed, he can be the man that finally does fill that left-hand side. And I've got to be honest with you, I know it's early days, but the promising partnership of Romero and Van der Ven is one that we hope will eventually come to flourish. It's early days, of course, with Van der Ven. Only had, as we know, the free training sessions before, of course, being given his debut by Ange Postecoglou, quite literally thrown in. So, yeah, I mean, look, from a first time playing, as we know, despite you may argue and say there was obviously his error for the goal, I think we've got to say that was a fairly impressive debut from Mickey Van der Ven. And, as a whole, I think we can all safely say, as we try and obviously get Tom back in a second, that we all enjoyed that brand of football. It's been so long, as you guys know, the last, 3.5, 4 years that we've been subjected to, let's be honest about it, some quite dire football. So to be actually see Spurs on the front foot, and that's definitely what I want to ask Tom, is the way in which the transition from one manager to another in the space of, let's be honest about it, weeks has been really remarkable. So I think that in itself tells you, and I'm sure we'll come on to that point, is that just that clear, structured message from Ange to the players is really coming across. So the hope would be, fingers crossed, that continues. And obviously in the coming weeks, those players continue to understand, acknowledge, get to know the brand of football they're being asked to play. Because quite honestly, I think we can all safely say that, fingers crossed, if we can show that on a consistent basis, then we're in for a really exciting Tottenham side. And I can now stop filling the holes and bring back the wonderful Tom Barclay. Tom, how are you there? You okay?
I'm sorry, man. My internet just completely died.
No problem. It's not your fault. We got to the absolute crux of what you were saying, and we completely lost you there.
Right, yeah,
I'll let you pick up. I'll let you pick up there, because you mentioned, of course, that really emotional interview you obviously did with Eric Dyer and Dele Alli. And I was just saying that I think we all hope Dele at some point comes back to the player that we know he can be, because we saw at the weekend that almost display that Everton had at the home end for him. I think we all really hope we see that player again, because there's no doubt about it, on his day, he can be a superstar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone thinks that now. If you don't, there's just something wrong with you, really. I mean, to see what he's gone through is amazing. But yeah, I mean, let's try and pick it up where I dropped off was Eric. Yeah, he did well there, Ricky. I'm sure not that he's heard it, but I imagine you did that well.
Apparently.
But yeah, so it was the moment when I sort of said, Dele had been saying what a great guy you are, and I think so. He was having his wedding. That's what I was saying, and at that point, he knew that Dele was at rehab, and he wasn't sure if he was going to make it. And when he sort of asked Dele whether that was would he be able to come, Dele was annoyed. His first response was annoyed that he would even ask. Obviously, he'd be there. He's one of his best mates, and I know I know Eric in particular has been, let's be honest, hammered by quite a lot of Spurs fans recently for the last sort of year or so for his performances. Fans are welcome to think what they think about performances. That's the name of the game, and Eric knows that better than anyone. Trust me.
I was going to ask you that, Tom. I don't want to cut you there, but I must just ask you that because you mentioned it. How much acutely aware do you think the player is of that in terms of that social media output there is in terms of, in the most politest way, there is obviously, as you know, a lot of noise online about Eric Dyer. Obviously, there was that moment in time where there was speculation that he may be offered a new contract, and you've seen, well, again, you may have seen the uproar there has been in social media about that. How aware would you say the player is of that particular situation online?
I think someone like Eric blocks it out, doesn't really look at it. It's, I think a lot of younger players, particularly just, I guess most players now, because given their ages, have generally had social media in their lives for a long time. But definitely the younger ones coming through, it's just like literally they've grown up with it. So that would be difficult for them to switch off from and be well aware of everything that comes their way. And that has pros and cons. I know that if I criticize a player and someone doesn't agree with it, people can really sort of jump on top of it, and they can get very defensive, or they can praise players to the high, because they're heroes, aren't they? To sort of to the high hill, and that can be good, but that can also not, if you've got an ego anyway, which a lot of players can do, it's only going to probably make that inflate that a bit more. But obviously there's the other side of it where they're getting grief, and there can be terrible things, obviously racism and all the other different things that have come in through social media, which we've seen over the years. So I don't know, I genuinely think Eric's at a place in his life, and he's a bit different to your average player where he's got other interests. I don't think football was always and it's obviously his priority, but I think he's able to step away from it. So I think, but I don't know him that well, but from this sort of few times I've done in the mix zones and from this particular interview, I got the sense that, he was able to step away from it. But it can't be nice if he ever does check his Instagram and things like that. But anyway, the point I was going to make was this whole Dele situation and the friendship they've got there. So it just reminds you that they are players. They have friendships. Often the players are their best mates are the ones they came through at the academy rather than at senior level, just because football can be quite a transient business, and it's the ones that you sort of grew up with that are your best mates, at least in my experience of interviewing hundreds of players from across the leagues over the years. But I suppose Eric and Dele were together from a very early age when they had Tottenham, and they have sort of 6-7 years together, not just Spurs and England. And we all saw various videos and things like that over the years of their friendship. It seems very genuine. But back to your original point. We just hope that Dele can come back in some way. Although it sounds like, listening to Sean Dyche of late, he sounds a long way off with his injury from being match fit. But fingers crossed.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. So I'm going to bring on slightly. I do want to ask you about Spurs' new chief footballing officer that was spotted at the weekend, of course, up at the GTEC, but hasn't formally started work. I mean, I don't know what you think, Tom. You've only been covering the club in reality for maybe a short period, maybe to the rest of the gang, the likes of obviously the Allis, the Dan Kilpatricks. I don't know if you've known such a soap opera of a club. And I know Ali, bless him, says that a lot. But it is, this is my words, not your words. It does feel like a basket case at times. I've never known a football club just continual drama on a week-by-week basis. And I mean, like I say, being a fan as I have been for without giving away my age too much, a long, long time. It is, just looking from, again, doing these shows as we do, it just feels like there's constant news with Tottenham. Not always positive as we know, but where do you think we are with Scott Munn? Do you think he'll eventually start the role anytime soon? Any ideas from your end?
To be honest, on this particular subject and the director of football, I can't give you any particularly amazing insights. All I know is Scott Munn, he was at the game the other day. I think pretty sure, well, I know because I saw him. He was at quite a few of those preseason games. And he hasn't officially started, but I guess the way we all know that he's it feels like he's getting on with it, but I don't really know. I don't want to get myself in sort of hot water over what I say on that front, but put it this way, he has been at the games. I'm sure, he was supposed to start on the 1st of July. We're now dragging into August now. I can only really speculate on why that might be, but which I'd probably best not go into, but I feel like eventually it will happen, won't it? And it'll be interesting when he finally gets his role officially, what that will mean for the whole makeup of the club. It seems like his role is to take care of the football operations side of things. I don't know if we're sort of putting two and two together when it comes to just the fact that Ange is an Australian, or at least Greek-born, but lived his life in Australia. Scott Munn, was obviously Aussie. Like, they didn't work together before, but I'm told it's a very small sort of community, the football community in Australia. So I think they knew each other well. So I think, again, I'm putting two and two together, but that I think it's a safe assumption that he would have had that there was a reason why Ange was brought in, or maybe signed it off. Although Tottenham would obviously say that he wasn't in post then, he still isn't now. So officially probably doesn't have any responsibility. It's a bit of a funny one, isn't it?
Yeah, quite literally. I mean, like I say, it is. I do want to ask you again, Tom, this might be more an opinion rather than anything inside from your perspective. With Daniel Levy, of course, being the chairman, I actually listened to a fascinating interview today with Paul Barber, who was on TalkSport, and he was asked to really define how his role is and kind of the role that Tony Bloom plays. And he said, look, Tony just lets us get on with our jobs. He basically fits in the people that he feels work for the organisation. And Tony only really gets involved when he needs to. He kind of delegates well, lets everyone kind of do their thing. And I just wonder with Daniel, there is obviously this big narrative that Daniel is a bit of a controller, does like to, of course, be involved quite, I say heavy-handed, but obviously fairly involved in the departments that he needs to be, of course, one being transfers. Do you genuinely think that we will see Daniel take a step back when Scott does eventually start? Because I think, again, from the outside looking in, I think people do widely acknowledge that Daniel, from the off-pitch side in terms of the stadium and training ground, has done a magnificent job. I think there's no doubt about that. But I don't know a time in which there's been this amount of frustration, anger in and around the ownership. So I just wonder, from your perspective, again, maybe an opinion piece or you, do you think Daniel will take that step back and allow Scott to essentially manage those areas?
Well, again, I don't know him personally, but from all accounts, it does feel like Daniel Levy over the years has been very, has liked to be sort of heavily involved in lots of parts of the job. I can only go on what Spurs have said, that Scott Munn is supposed to come in to sort of kind of give Daniel a chance to take a step back on that front. I guess we'll wait and see if that actually is the case. If someone is, who spent 20 years of being at the forefront of every sort of facet of the club, particularly when it comes to transfer business and the major things that the running of the club and that front, that would be quite hard to change from that. I mean, you mentioned Paul Barber. He's obviously someone who used to work for Daniel Levy at Tottenham. I covered Brighton a lot before I started the Tottenham beat. I know Paul, I don't know him really well, but I've interviewed him quite a few times over the years. And I mean, Brighton's such a brilliantly run club. Ali's going to love that, because he always goes on about how I would rather be covering Brighton than Tottenham. That's not the case, but it's hard to not.
I don't know, Tom. I wouldn't blame you based on some of the performances last season.
No, well, yeah. I mean, back to the Tottenham way. I've been banging on about De Zerbi for ages.
Very
happy with Ange, but De Zerbi is fantastic.
You sold him to me, Tom. I'm not gonna lie. I listened to you over the summer. You sold him to me, mate, about 500 times. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, he's very good, but just the way Brighton are sort of set up. There's a reason why they're selling players for astronomical fees and still making strides forward. I mean, you do be fascinated to see if they can continue that progress this year with Europa League and carrying on selling their best players. But Paul Barber is he's absolutely right when he talks about the way that club is really well set up to function as it does, with Tony Bloom getting involved in the major things, but genuinely trusting his and delegating, trusting the people he's delegated to do their jobs properly. And I guess if Daniel can, if he can take that kind of approach to Spurs, that can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. What we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of the show. For our listeners on audio, we're joined by the wonderful Tom Barclay, senior football writer at The Sun. We've got over 1,000+ of you watching us live. Thank you so much, as always, for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. Now, I know many of you are here for this sole reason alone. We're going to dive slightly into the transfer market. I say dive slightly in, it's fair to say we're coming towards the end of it. So we'll be really intrigued to get Tom's thoughts, both in terms of incomings and outgoings, and where Tom does see things are at. Just to give a bit of an overview, if you don't mind, Tom, obviously Spurs last week, they completed the signings respectively of Mickey van der Ven and Alejo Veliz. I'm still working on that name, which I'm sure all the Spurs podcasters are as well, because we're going to be judged on how well we know these players based on how we pronounce those names. And I know Ali, bless him, was already getting his voice in control, getting ready not to be, like I say, getting these mispronounced. They, of course, were Tottenham's 5th and 6th signings respectively of the window following the arrivals of James Maddison, Ashley Phillips, Guillermo Vicario, and Israeli winger Manor Solomon. Overall, Tom, give me your honest thoughts what you've made of Spurs' incomings during this summer transfer window.
Mixed, I'd say. But I'm a generally pretty positive guy, so I want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and there is potential in pretty much all of them. It's not so much the players they've brought in, the ones that I'm sort of mixed about. It's more like who else they could have got. So to be honest, the main one is the goalkeeper. So I really liked Vicario when we interviewed him out in Perth. He speaks very good English. He's a real character. Perfect, that side of things. But from the games I've watched so far, I can't say I've been completely sold on him yet. But it is only one Premier League game and a few preseason games, and he's adapting to a new league. So all of those caveats. But it's more the fact that I'm a huge fan of David Raya, and now watching him go on loan to Arsenal in what effectively will be about a £30 million move when it goes through, which, all right, is about double what they're paying for Vicario. And I know Spurs, having to work quite hard with what they're, being savvy with the money they're spending, albeit that was before they decided to sell Kane. I just feel like Raya was perfect for that position. And so proven already and homegrown. It just ticked every box for me personally. But, one game, Vicario so far. And in 6 months' time or even earlier, even sooner, I could easily be eating my words. I hope I will be. I'm not writing him off at all. I'm just saying I haven't been completely, bowled over yet.
I think the thing is, Tom, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, I think the problem is because Raya was so heavily linked in those opening weeks of the window, and by, again, report Spurs had already agreed personal terms with the player. It was just essentially sorting out the fee. The feeling I get is it feels like, and again, I might be wrong here, it feels like Spurs have essentially not wanted to pay the price at the time for David Raya, and in many people's eyes, they've gone for more of a cheaper option that, I'd say this in the most politest way, is more of a project keeper. In terms of that, I do feel that he may make mistakes on the job, but we're going to have to back him. Whereas David Raya, to be fair, obviously was in the Premier League for a couple of years, seemed fairly established, of course, on the international scene as well. And I think, again, that's my only problem. It's obviously, as we know, this summer Spurs have been driven by data, as we're being told, driven by data. So I think, again, from the outside looking in with fans, they're just seeing, again, Vicario as the cheap option. And that's my biggest worry, whether he's going to be judged on that basis rather than being judged as a player. If it was, I say, Vicario being linked all along, as it was Van de Ven being linked all along, I don't think there'd be this main amount of concern. I think there's more concern because David Raya was so fairly the first choice Spurs wanted, but then seemed to bark at the asking price. Am I fair to say that?
Maybe. I mean, I think that maybe they just thought he was such a good goalkeeper, and the bonus was it was a really good price. Or maybe I'm being too fair on them. It may be what your characterization is might be spot on. I'm not sure. All I know is personally, I think Raya was perfect. But also, if Spurs hadn't moved for Vicario, it sounds like Inter Milan were probably going to try and buy him once they sold Onana to Man United, because that always seemed like it was on the cards. So that shows you how highly rated he is in Italy. Yeah. It's just that, obviously, like everyone, every fan reading up on him, and as a journalist, I've had to write about him too. Hear a lot about his ability with his feet, and I haven't seen it yet. To be honest, I don't feel like I've seen that in the game so far. Yep. But again, it's all of this is caveated with one game. But yeah, so I feel like he's got most to prove out of all of them so far. Van de Ven, we've literally seen him one game, but he's been thrown in. I was really worried about this match for Spurs, for Ange as well. Brentford away. Yes, they didn't have Tony, but Brentford, as we've seen before, I've been banging on about this on the Tottenham way for the last few weeks. We've been gearing up to this, but that Man United game where they battered Man United 4-0 and Ten Hag come in with a new philosophy and then reined it in basically after that, realizing that you can't change everything at once. And I was wondering, I don't think Ange will do that even if they lose 4-0, and how's this going to go down? But obviously overall it was a solid performance, and Van de Ven played his part. He was unlucky with that deflection past Vicario for Visser's goal, make them go 2-1 up. But I think I liked what I saw overall. There was one moment in the first half we drove out with the ball, which I wonder if we'll see that more often. Although Dan Kilpatrick on the podcast the other day was saying that maybe he won't be doing that as much. It'll be more Romero taking it out. So we'll wait to see on that. And obviously, the biggest sort of the thing that I've written in basically every piece about him is how he was dubbed the quickest centre back in the Bundesliga last year, and I think we saw that rapid pace pretty quickly, and that's why I wasn't surprised when Ange chucked him straight into the team. Not because Ben Davies is not a good player, and a lot of us were wondering. I did go with Dogie in my sort of predicted lineup, but I wasn't sure whether he'd go for Davies instead. But with the pace of Mbumu and Sade, who I thought was going to start, obviously came off the bench, and that high line, which is something that I'm going to be worrying about all season.
We all will be.
That was a real worry. So it didn't surprise me that Van de Ven came in straight away, and I thought he did well. So a good, solid performance to work from. And actually, today we sort of heard from him publicly, or it was after the game, but quotes went out today at midday, and he speaks very well. And I know a lot of people sort of talked about Jan Vertonghen comparisons, just mainly I suppose because he's a left-sided centre back, and all right, Jan was Belgian but came through at Ajax, and obviously Van de Ven's Dutch, so similar kind of ish background. And he actually said, he'd been watching him. I think he must have gone to Ajax regularly, Van de Ven, as a kid, and used to watch him and used to study his videos. So if you see comparisons there, it's not just completely by luck; it's kind of by design, because he's looked into Vertonghen. And then briefly, or however long you want to go on for, really, about the other side.
You go for it, Tom. You take the mic. Go for it.
Well, I like Manor Solomon a lot from what I've seen, actually. Personally, I know they liked Harvey Barnes. And obviously they got Maddison. Barnes went to Newcastle. I remember writing a piece back in May that the two of Newcastle and Spurs were sort of fighting it out in some parlance, or wanted both of them. And obviously one of them got one and the other one got the other. And I guess Barnes did go for nearly 40 million in the end to Newcastle. So it wasn't a relatively expensive deal for a relegated player, but I think we've already seen from his time at Newcastle just what a threat he can be going forward. It's funny, the Newcastle fans weren't quite sold on him because they love Sam Maximan, but already you can see why Eddie likes him. He might be I don't think there's many players at all as skillful on his day as Sam Maximan, a player who's a bit like Ben Arthur, could do things. When he turns it on, he can do anything.
Unbelievable.
But Barnes is probably way more consistent, more of a goal threat. And I thought he would have been good for this Tottenham team. Whereas Solomon, free transfer, maybe they might end up having to pay some money, kind of back to what you were saying about Vicario. But I have to say, having watched Solomon in pre-season in a few games, I don't think he came off the bench, did he, against Brentford? But
no, we didn't. No.
Pre-season games, I thought he looked very lively, a very different kind of player, more probably better on the ball than Barnes, not as quick, a bit more of a creator, sort of busy wide player, and I think that's quite good for quite a nice addition compared to what Spurs have already got. So I think he might go a bit under the radar. So as a decent signing, obviously you have to see when the big stuff starts, when he starts getting game time, because I guess he only played against West Ham were a decent team, but they actually had quite a lot of young players playing that game, and obviously Lion City Sailors. How much can you glean from a opponent like that, right? But I thought he was decent. And then I'm trying to think who else they got, and obviously the main man, James Maddison. I mean, actually, there was actually interest right at the end, tentative interest from Man City.
Really? Okay.
I did like that, and I think somebody else did as well. I forget who. But by then it was kind of done from Spurs' point of view. And I think the fact that Man City were even having a thought about him just sums up what a great player is. In fact, you could see him being brilliant for Pep just because he's such a good technical footballer. But no, he was sold on the whole Spurs move and Ange, and already within one game, one half.
Mad, isn't it? Tom, he looks like a proper Spurs player. A lot of people will say that, but he looks like a proper Spurs player. I think again, our frustration as Spurs fans is we've got him 6 years too late. But listen, at least we've got him now. Then that's the sad thing. I think we all would love to have seen him and Harry together, because Michael, could you imagine the amount of goals those two would have generated and combined with them? But I'm sure, like you say, they're wonderful player, unbelievable player, right on his day. I
completely concur. It's sad, isn't it, that they didn't get to play together. competitively. And I think, well, apart from for England, and that would have been great for England as well. As an England fan, that would have been really helpful. Albeit, I wonder how going to Tottenham, not Spurs specifically, but the position he's going to play is going to help his England cause or hinder it. In fact, I even put it to him in that now infamous Bangkok press conference, because of our good friend Max Schrader at Build holding up that Harry Kane shirt. But before that, all that happened, where he held up the shirt for.
I am gonna come back to that, so I promise.
It's in my mind. Before that, people might forget that James Maddison actually was up for the press conference before that happened, and Gareth Southgate has been on the record about how he sees Maddison as a or at least he this is how he used to feel. Whether this is changing, I don't know. But he saw him more as a forward, one of the front three. Now, I don't think he'll really play there for Spurs. I mean, you can already see he's going to play number 8, and what a great addition that is for Tottenham with the way Ange wants to play. And hopefully he'll play so well and get so many assists that it will force Southgate into having to still pick him and maybe even play him in that position, albeit he's got some competition with Jude Bellingham and other players like that. But apart from that, I mean, just think he's the player that Spurs have been crying out for years, particularly last year with the lack of creativity. In fact, the last 3 years, to be honest, isn't it? Barring that second half of that season where Antonio took him to the Champions League, which we do, and I'm guilty of as much as anyone. We do kind of gloss over how good that was. That was a real achievement. To be fair.
Yeah.
But in the main, the last 4 years have been pretty dull to watch, or at least pretty defensive. I remember writing pragmatic once, and my mate, who's a season ticket holder, was like, "It's not pragmatic. Pragmatic's like pragmatic." Well, this is when it was going very badly wrong at Conte, and they were conceding goals every game as well. You're saying pragmatic means that you're going in sort of thinking you're going to keep it tight, and it's a tactic. It's a useful way forward. Yeah. But we're conceding goals all the time. It's not pragmatic at all. It's if anything, it's the opposite of that. So I've picked myself up on that word. So it's more defensive minded, I suppose, counter-attacking.
The problem is, I mean, I got to say on that, because you mentioned it, it makes me laugh with Conte, because the problem is last season, we all kept saying, I think all the podcasts were saying it, we're conserving energy for the World Cup. Then we come out of the World Cup, we're thinking, we're still conserving energy. What's going on with this football club? It just was like the most bizarre. Do you know what? It's really hard to just even now look back at that Conte era and just not feel really disappointed, just because again there's the heightened expectation of what there was with him, with Jose and Alagobas, and a lot of Spurs fans feel like this, that Ange just feels like a Spurs manager, and it's just it's one of those things that you can't actually describe why, but it's more of a vibe. And again, you'll notice more, Tom, in press conferences. You're up and close with the man on a week-to-week basis, but there's that feeling you get with a manager. And it's mad, isn't it? I mean, I think he was maybe not concerned, Postecoglou. The things that were coming out from him was, at Celtic, where he felt like he had to kind of show the fans that he would win them over in the most bizarrest way at Tottenham, because of what we've gone through over the last 3-4 years. I think we are now just hearing a manager praise the football club or praise fans and just, actually want to be here. So to be fair, I think he's already won fans over. We're not having to do too much at the moment. I think we all recognise that there will be a period of transition. I think we all recognise that we might get a cuffing to that was one of our Richard Cracknell always says that on Last Word on Spurs. But I think generally there's an understanding that at least we've got somebody that actually wants to be there. And I think that's the biggest thing of all, right? I mean, I could, again, you don't have to say this. I don't want you to say this, but I mean, again, there must have been times when you was in those press conferences with Antonio where, quite frankly, you just know he just couldn't wait to get out of the room. There just must have been that feeling at times where, again, different press conferences at different times, but it feels with Ange, he's really invested. And again, speaking to you guys, seems that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Albeit, again, back to what I was saying, but from a journalist's point of view, Antonio's press conferences could be brilliant for articles. I mean, so he's quite random. Sometimes he'd be really in a really bad mood and you wouldn't really understand why. And sometimes he'd be totally fine, albeit behind the scenes raging after a bad performance. But I mean, I was at Norwich for that final game of the season where Sonny got the Golden Boot and Champions League and everything, and even then he wouldn't sort of confirm he was staying. So, bit of a red flag at that point. Here's a good example of, I think, the difference between them. There were times, obviously, particularly last year, where it wasn't going well, obviously, but it wasn't going well, arguably because of his how wedded he was to his tactics, which just weren't working. The three at the back just wasn't working. They were conceding goals all the time. The defensive approach, and he would not hear any of it. He would not. Like it was almost like he couldn't believe that people were having the temerity to question it. And I kind of get why. Like he won the Premier League with Chelsea. Like they finished 10th the year before, and he won the Premier League. He won. He's got the pedigree, and Tottenham haven't won anything for a long time. But I did think that really started to wind fans up. To be fair, but that is generally kind of how it came across. That he was just like, no, it's just clearly it came across because he went off and won, didn't he, in that final presser at Southampton where he talks about the players being selfish. He put it all on them. And Ange instantly, like say against Man United in the week, Vicario gets lobbed 30 yards because he's off his line, 30 yards off his line. Because
don't say things so that could actually happen, because that could happen.
But that literally happened for, I think it was Yokohama. And instantly he was like, don't blame me for it, it's my tactics, it's my fault. He'll take the blame for it. And whilst he's got an ego like all managers do, and one thing I did learn actually interestingly out there is that I don't think he likes people who go on too long with their questions, because I think he thinks they're a bit sort of loving the sound of their own voice, which is sometimes for some of us that might be a bit of an issue. We need to rein it in beforehand, because he used a good example. So he met Sir Alex Ferguson probably like 20 years ago now, when his Brisbane Roar might be, I can't remember which team he was managing at the time, played against Man United in that year that they didn't play in the FA Cup because of the Club World Cup, or whatever it was called at the time. I can't remember the exact name of the competition. And he said it was like gold that time with Fergie. I think some of these quotes came out from the sit down we had where he talked about it. But one of the things he said was, I asked him, like, what did you ask him? And I think he kind of took it as me saying, like, what did you say, rather than like, what did you ask? Because his initial response was like, look, when you're in the presence of that kind of thing, you just want to listen. Like, and he was saying there are so many fans who come up to him, or people over the years who come up to him saying, like, oh, can't wait to meet Ange and can't wait to meet you and all this kind of thing. And then spend the 10 minutes they've got with him just basically talking themselves, and they leave it like Ange not having said anything. So I do think whilst he is not, it's not like he's someone who needs to hear himself speak all the time. He also definitely doesn't suffer fools gladly, but he also doesn't want to hear a bunch of bluster from a random journalist when he knows it is him we're here all there to speak to hear from. So that is something that he does know, like, he's the boss, definitely. And he can, and I've heard he can definitely, he can let the players know as well already that he is the boss, even though he comes across as this sort of cuddly guy, which I think players do really love him for that. There's the other side to him which we haven't seen so much publicly, but it definitely does exist. But I just think, but at the same time, if something happened where there was some sort of tactical error or something like that, and we questioned him, I don't think he'd take it like Antonio would. I think he'd be like, yeah, fair enough, that was my mistake. And that is a big difference between the two of them.
But the key message, Tommy, is to all the Spurs journos, keep the questions tight.
Yes, well, I try my best. You can tell I waffle a bit sometimes.
I think the great thing is, though, at least this time around, unlike Antonio, the answers won't be 10 minutes long, and you will get a question in, right? I mean, that was the only concern. That was the other concern.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, back to what I was saying about filibustering, he does often. It did feel at times where he just basically ate up the time by just saying what he says and repeating it. It felt like there were some press conferences where you go, probably, to be honest, most of them, you go in and you'd be like, because this is how it goes ahead of a press conference. You think about what you're going to ask. You might talk to your colleagues about what you're thinking of, what subjects we get them on today. Because there are times when, not so much with Tottenham, because as you mentioned, there's always something to report on. But there are times when it's middle of the season, nothing much is going on. You're having to work quite hard to get a line out of someone because there's no obvious talking points. And so sometimes we sort of confer about what we're going to ask. And with Antonio, it just felt pointless. Like, you might as well have just said, Antonio, do you want to talk for half an hour and then let us know what you want to say, rather than very rare that someone hit him with a question and it revealed something. It suddenly elicited a response that we didn't know was coming. Apart from Dan's one at the end on the Southampton one. Exactly. So there was quite a famous exception. But with Ange, well, it's early days. Who knows? I mean, he's got a pretty masterful hand over us. But I do think, like back to what we were saying about being honest, I think you can hit him with a question, and he'll consider his response and might give you something that he wasn't planning on doing before. But ask me again in a year's time if hopefully he's still there and it's going well. Whether he's changed, I don't know.
Fingers crossed. Tom, I'm going to bring us back. My fault completely. It's my fault. I'm taking you off script. So obviously overall, I think there was the feeling that obviously Spurs are putting us on a goalkeeper. You say they've ticked that ticked that box. Obviously, a couple of centre-backs who can play predominantly left and right, along with a potential winger who I think Spurs have got now, and obviously Manor Solomon and that creative number midfielder in James Maddison. Do you think those were the specific areas Spurs were looking to do? And is there any other things we should keep an eye on between now and the end of the month, in your opinion?
Yeah, 100%. I think those are the positions they were looking for. I mean, Maddison obviously was the prime target. He wanted, we knew he was going to play with these 2 number 8s, and he wanted a more creative midfielder in there, and Maddison completely fit the bill. And he also thought he was an absolute bargain for his price, which he talked about the other day when he was asked about just spending money, particularly with the Harry money in not his back pocket, as he pointed out, but in the club's back pocket. They wanted a new winger because Lucas obviously left and Juma left, saying that he didn't really get a chance to impress. So from a numbers game, they needed someone, albeit probably more of a squad player. I mentioned Barnes before, thinking he would have been a good signing, but they went for Solomon. And then centre-backs, plural, is definitely still the plan. I know they brought Ashley Phillips in, but he's not considered to be the senior one, although he might be part of the squad this season. I don't know what the plan is, whether he goes out on loan or if he stays, but I'm talking about senior centre-backs. He wants to obviously go to a back 4, which we all knew. Van der Ven obviously has come in, so he's probably the main sort of senior player centre back they're going to sign, because he's going to play with Romero. Now it depends what. So I don't think they'll buy another big money centre back, because I think the next one, if they get one in. So interestingly, like a couple of weeks, well, you follow it all, so you know exactly the timeline. But I think after the Shakhtar game, he specifically said we're hoping to get another 1 or 2 in that area, i.e. centre-backs, in the week. And then when, was it in Barcelona where I wasn't there, my colleague Jack Russell was there and Ali was there, or it might have been post-Brentford when he was asked again about, and he still wants another one, but he wasn't quite as like, this is definitely going to happen. So I guess we'll see. But I imagine it's more likely to be someone who can compete, not so much backup, but more squad player. Because those 2, I imagine, will be the first choice. Most of the names you already know about. So I think you were asking me about Tapsoba. I see him as it was either him or Van der Ven. So I'd be really surprised at his price. Okay. Obviously, they've got the Kane money now, but I think they were kind of planning on that anyway, based on what Ange was saying. So I don't imagine that will change. I think it's probably more likely to be someone like a Tosin Adarabioyo, although it sounds like he might prefer Monaco. Wouldn't rule out Clement Longley coming back, which you might have some thoughts on. I always quite liked him.
I think that we have many thoughts on that.
Okay, fair enough. Or maybe it'll be someone completely out of the woodwork. But all right, but back to your original question, I think another centre back is probably likely, not like definite, but likely, more than a possibility. And then central midfield is going to be an interesting one. So I don't know now. I think he quite likes Skip and Sarr a lot. I think he does think they're very good. And he's obviously got Bentancur coming back. I think Højbjerg, not sure if he will go now. I think if I put my money on it, I'd say he would be gone by the end of the window. Atletico obviously well reported how much they want him in talks with sorry, I might be stepping on a few of your questions later, but in talks with Spurs. But it's kind of gone a bit quieter recently, and I wouldn't say it was nailed on that he'll definitely leave, but I think it's probably more likely than not. But if he goes, is it definite that they'll bring someone else in? Maybe, but you think of so Bissouma seems to be the number one sort of pivot or defensive midfielder, but you think Skip could play that role as well when Bentancur comes back. I probably see him as being more one of the number 8. So I imagine it'd be Bentancur, Maddison, and Bissouma. But Skip and I liked Sarr in that Shakhtar game. pushing right up with Maddison. I thought he was quite useful, and I think Ange likes him a lot. Am I missing someone? I'm not sure if there's somebody else I've missed. I wouldn't rule it out that they bring another central midfielder, but I don't think it's completely nailed on either. And then after that, and another forward probably. I mean, the ones that have been mentioned are Gift, Orban. I think it's going to be more likely to be a younger sort of player with potential, more classic Spurs signing rather than Romelu Lukaku, as was suggested the other day. I don't see that one happening.
Couple of things I can say there, Tom. I am getting some feedback on your mic, which I don't know if you're able just to adjust from your end there when I'm talking. If you can't, it's absolutely no problem at all. We can try and roll with it. But yeah, you mentioned there, but obviously we covered centre half, so it feels like we might have to realign our expectations slightly, as you're saying from your perspective, that we may not get the big money centre back. You mentioned obviously there Tosin Adarabioyo. We've had, I think, Per Schurz linked recently to the club. Is that a name that you've come across, Tom, in recently to you? Is that one we should keep an eye on from Torino?
I don't know on specifically Spurs, only because I've only I've seen, I think he was linked to Newcastle earlier this summer as well.
Indeed, yeah,
but I don't know specifically. But that wouldn't that kind of signing. I think he's Torino, isn't he? Would sort of be a similar kind of player that would fit the bill. Although I think he'd be a bit more expensive. I mean, like I say, they could still do something a bit more expensive. But I just think Romero and Van der Ven are likely to be the first choice pairing. Yeah. And the message, the sort of consistent message that Ange has been putting out there, publicly, but also the sort of what I'm hearing from within the club, it's all about selling players at the moment rather than bringing players in. Now, maybe they say that, maybe that's the message that they want out there because they don't want to, want to be a big smoke screen in case they do kind of bring in another player. But you have to add up the numbers. They got massive squad, way too many players.
That's what I'm about to ask you, I think. So I think when I last counted, and again, I might again be out here a little bit, I think we're looking at about a 38, 39-man squad. And I think you recently reported that Spurs are attempting to try and shift, I think, up to 7 players or, around 7 players, the likes of Lloris, Spence, Dyer, Tanganga, Reguilon, Harvey White, and Ndombele. It does feel between now and that deadline, so we're going to have to get bodies out because ultimately we haven't got any European football. There's, one game a week? I mean, I'm sure the club are acutely aware of this. I actually am really surprised, to be honest with you, that they've done what they've done so far. And I'm not, again, trying to praise the club here too much in terms of bringing the players in, but I thought there would be a lot more emphasis on getting the players out before bringing those in. But they've kind of gone back to front on it. So do you think the club are confident that they'll move those players on that you've recently reported on?
Well, the only one I would suggest, because in that piece, I didn't specifically say that Dyer, that they definitely want to get rid of him. I just mentioned that those 7 players, when none of them were in the squad and on and they were all available. But the other 6, I'm pretty sure, are all up for transfer. I'm not saying they wouldn't take a Dyer transfer either, but I don't know exactly what the plan is. I think Eric wants to stay, so that might make things different in his situation. But yeah, I mean, back to you, am I surprised? Well, they were getting a new manager, so they obviously got to back him. It sounds like they were planning on Harry going, even though it was, we can get into that about how nailed on it was going to be or not. So I think they probably thought it was probably going to happen. So that might be part of it too, while they've spent early. But yeah, definitely it's about whistling it down. And that list doesn't include the likes of Ryan Sessegnon. Now, I'm not saying that they want to get rid of him, but if he were fit, I'd be surprised if he was going to be on that list as well. I think there are question marks about him. But look, Ange came in and he gave everyone a clean slate. And you can tell from the fact that Gio Lo Celso, even though I'm not sure, did he come on against Brentford? I don't know, I can't remember. But he was obviously on the bench, and he's come back into the fold, and obviously was part of that bomb squad last season under Conte. Those 4 of Winks and Ndombele, Lo Celso, and Reguilon. That shows how he gave, like I say, everyone a clean slate. But as you point out, they've got no Europe. Those players, it was never, you can't fit 35 or 38, as you say, into 25. And even 25 seems like quite a big squad for Spurs this season. So the players were always going to move on. And yeah, definitely that list that I said that you mentioned, apart from I'm not quite sure about Eric, will all, if they can if they can sell them, I think they'll be open to that. But as was proven last summer with those four of Winkston, Ndombele, Lo Celso, and Reguilon, they wanted to sell them then. They were desperate to sell all of them then. They couldn't get buyers, so they had to loan them, and some of them loaned them without options. Hence why they're back, or why clubs didn't sign them permanently. In fact, I don't think any of them went to the clubs they were on loan at. Obviously, Harry's gone to Leicester. So it proves how difficult it is in the market. I mean, I think people sort of forget a little bit that Europe, there isn't a lot of money going around in Europe still. Maybe a bit more than it was, and it was heavily impacted by COVID, apart from Bayern Munich, it seems. And so, players like Reguilon, I mean, Reguilon's going to be hard to move on, I think. Anyone who's watched him pre-season, he's had a tricky time so far. And Ndombele, same for him. He's on massive wages. Didn't really pull up any trees at Lyon or Napoli. He's had his chance really at Spurs and hasn't impressed in this time. And I thought he was a bit unlucky, didn't he? Got injured, or he got a knock in that first training session, the open one at the Wacker in Perth. But my information is it's not gone down particularly well. How he hasn't won anyone over, put it that way. So they'll look to sell him as well. But whether they'll be able to get a fee, whether to be able to sell him is going to be tricky. I think it'd be more of might end up having to loan him again. So the focus, like I said, is all about trying to move players on at the moment.
Yep. No, I do agree. Tom, I don't want to take you too far over the hour mark. You all right? We've got 15, 20 minutes to use. That going to be okay?
Let's go for another 10, 15 and then...
10, 15, amazing. Right, what we are going to do, we are going to go for our final break of the show for our listeners on audio. Thank you so much for joining us. We've still got over 1,000 plus of you watching. Really, really appreciate it. We're joined by the brilliant Tom Barclay, senior football writer for The Sun. Of course, I'm sure you would have heard Tom's dulcet tones also on the Tottenham way. You can check those out as well. Before I ask you, obviously, about maybe an elephant in the room that we're going to address towards the end of the show, Tom, you mentioned about Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. There's obviously been tentative links around a number of different midfield targets for Tottenham. There's been suggestions that they're looking maybe at the likes of Conor Gallagher, Brennan Johnson, Eberechi Eze. But I mean, me saying that to you about Eze, with Palace selling Zaha, and I think now with Chelsea activating the clause, the release clause for Elise, I mean, even I can't see a window where they let all three of them go. So what's your thoughts on those potential targets for Tottenham? Anything that you can see genuinely coming off between now and into the window?
Those three?
I
don't. So who was the middle one? There was Gallagher, Eze.
We had Brennan Johnson, Gallagher, and Eberechi Eze.
Yeah. Well, Johnson's a bit of a different player, isn't he? He's more of a wide player.
Yeah, more of a wide player, yeah.
Way through the middle. I do think they like Brennan Johnson. In fact, all three of them are clearly like classic Spurs kind of targets. They're just really good young British players, which Tottenham have always liked. And I think they like all of them. Johnson, it sounds like Forest. There's a possibility he leaves this summer, but I don't know. It's quite a lot of money for Tottenham, even though I know they're flush. But I don't know, and I'm not sure if he's a starter. So I'd be I wouldn't be shocked if they signed him, but I'd be kind of surprised. Gallagher, I think would be perfect for this system, playing alongside Maddison with Basuma behind him. But Chelsea have asked previously for about 50 million. That's a lot for him. And he started obviously at the weekend. I know they've signed Caicedo and it looks like they're getting Lavia as well. But they're different kind of midfielders. It remains to be seen. It's interesting. There's been a few reports that they're open to letting him go. I'm sure if they got a bit of that kind of money, then that could well happen. But from what I'm hearing, if he is to leave, I don't know if Spurs would be the place. Just from the player's point of view, I think if he's going to leave Chelsea, he wants to go somewhere where he'll definitely play every week. Now, I personally think he'd be great for Spurs in that position, but I don't know whether the fact that Bentancur, when he comes back, would be viewed in that position. But one to watch maybe on that front. And Eze, I think he's fantastic and seems to have. I think he's probably proven his fitness now. Over that was a real bad injury, and weirdly he came back really quickly, but it took him ages to get back to any kind of pre-injury form with that Achilles. but obviously he was fantastic towards the end of last season. I just think Palace, they will sell at the right price for most of their players, but you lose Zaha, you sell Michael Olise, which is, they had to because of the release clause.
Yep.
They're going to be asking for mega money for anyone else. They really, really want to keep, I think, and Eze would be the prime candidate for that. So unless Spurs want to splash that kind of money, I can't see that happening either. And I have actually looked into that particular possibility, and the word I got back on that front was probably not now. I don't think so. So okay. Sadly, probably not. But they got that money at the moment, Spurs, so wouldn't be surprised. But Ange said, specifically after that Friday presser, Harry hadn't left at that point, but he was on his way. That they've been planning for this for a while, and nothing really changes with the strategy. So I think any fans who are sort of half expecting a massive rabbit to be pulled out of the hat, I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay, so we'll say, I mean, yeah, I think there is a genuine feeling amongst Spurs fans that we are going to see a couple of, maybe I would say, a couple of surprises towards the end of the window, but maybe we should realign. Yeah, I mean,
look, we hear things, we check them out, and things change. Things change all the time. And results can change things. I mean, see how it goes on. The day Man United, they beat them 3-0, and everyone's like, "Well, we don't need anyone else, do we?" Because look at that is the
hat-trick. I think that's the worry, Tom. That is the worry that we beat Man United. If we do beat Man United 3-0 on the basis of how they played last night for about 65 minutes, it could be a possibility. But I think that is the worry that if we do well in these next few games before the end of the month, there might be that feeling that essentially Spurs don't need to spend. But I think over the course of the season, I think there might be a concern over the quality of some of the areas. Which, look, again, I think to be fair, it's been I don't know if I can call it a decent window when you go and lose a striker that has consistently scored you 25 to 30 goals over the course of 7 to 8 seasons. It's really hard to call it a decent window. But look, it could be a fairly good window towards the end. My biggest worry is that I still in my mind, I mean, whilst we've strengthened other areas, are we more stronger now than we were? I mean, have we come out of the window stronger than what we have been going into it? And again, it's really hard to say. Well, exactly.
Simple as that, isn't it? But I do think the managers and Maddison as well, but they kind of come together really because of the way the manager uses him. Is the reason for being optimistic. But I do worry that if they don't sign a striker or don't sign a sort of, I just don't think they're going to buy like a sort of one that we've all heard of who's done it for years and years and years. But if it is to be a younger player and Richarlison is to be given his chance to be the main man, based on what I've seen so far, I would worry. But then that's because you've had the best striker in the world playing up front for you for the last however many years. So anyone's going to look like a step down. But I think we already saw it, didn't we, on the weekend, that final chance at Brentford. And it wasn't, it's not a terrible miss at all. It was a good block. But I just think, that's a chance that Kane takes. And if you're hanging your hat on Richarlison, I'm not really talking about his time at Tottenham, really, because I don't think it's really that fair to judge him on that 1 year because he never really got much of a chance to play down through the middle. Obviously, injured. Obviously, didn't go well at all. I mean, he described it in his own words, didn't he? Which I'm not going to say now. But I mean, it was quite a fair summation. But I'm looking at more of his Everton time, albeit in a weaker team. And definitely less of a possession-based team than Ange's team now. But he never scored, bucketfuls. So, but Ange wants to create a team that they don't rely on one player as much. So, it might be that forward position that Richarlison, if it is to be him, he might not score loads of goals, but what he does to create spaces behind him from his pressing, his running, might equate to lots of goals being scored just from other players. I think you have to really, watch Ange create what he's got in his head out on the pitch. But if it were me, I would be wanting another striker definitely as at least insurance.
As we're on to talk about Harry, we're going to finish on Harry, Tom. Are you surprised the club cashed in? Honestly,
I'm not surprised the club cashed in. No,
right.
I mean, Teddy Sheringham was speaking today, wasn't he? And he talks about how it was like a perfect business deal, which seems pretty brutal for fans to hear that. But I mean, Daniel Levy, or any chairman really, it's nothing specific to him. Albeit I know fans will take it that way, but like they'll look at the business of having to lose a player on a free transfer in a year's time, probably to one of your biggest rivals in the same league and you're in a season where, I mean, I kept trying to make this case, and I think I sort of talked myself into it about, the Champions League and how you could, keeping him there you can make your money back by finishing.
That's exactly where I was with it, Tom.
I think so, but I don't know. I saw this good video on The Athletic recently, which sort of broke down how much money you actually make, depending on where you're in the Champions League, and actually didn't even equate. Even if they finished in the Champions League next year, it wouldn't be the equivalent of selling for 100 million. Like, the numbers don't quite add up in that way anyway. But it's a big if, and you've got a manager who's come in who's up for rebuilding something. Who's not gonna complain about Harry going, and it just, from a club point of view, I'm not surprised at all. I'm more surprised at the player himself, to be honest. Maybe it speaks to the integrity of the guy that he left for a club that is pretty much the most palatable option out there, isn't it? Like, you're not going to really face Bayern Munich anytime soon, and even if you do, there's no sort of rivalry there. You don't have to watch him turn out for Man United or, heaven forbid, Chelsea. Definitely not Arsenal. Surely that would never have happened. But you don't have to see that happen. You get a big fee for him. But personally, I just feel like he could have just run down his contract and then had his absolute pick and made even probably, not that money's a major thing, and he's already on apparently 415 grand a week at Bayern. So clearly he's fine. But, he could have probably got even more than that if he'd hung around for a year in the likes of Barcelona, Real Madrid. So that's my surprise rather than the club. But I can see why, from a fan point of view, there's definitely disappointment. Totally get that.
Final one on it, Tom, because like you was in and around him on the tour. Did you get that feeling, Tom, being in and around him? I know you didn't specifically get an interview with him.
Yeah.
What was that like on the tour around him? Just give us a vibe of what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny looking back now, like maybe this all was kind of signposted from the off. Although, again, speaking to Dan the other day, and hearing about how it went down on Friday, it did seem like there was a genuine possibility that he would stay. But obviously he left, and as Ange pointed out, that was what his intention was right from that first meeting with Ange on, I think it was July the 12th, when he came back from preseason. Came back for preseason training, and then Ange, obviously, as he revealed from his first day in the job, which would have been June the 6th, he was fully thinking this is what was going to happen. And look, you could go back to signing Richarlison for 60 million last year. Maybe that was already the succession planning was in place. And as I've kept saying with Postecoglou, he's the kind of manager who rebuilds teams quickly. Celtic, he lost Odsonne Edouard straight away, who obviously you can't compare the two players, but is not far off in terms of how much he scored goals for Celtic and rebuilt a team that went on to become treble winners and go down in Scottish history. And he was not going to complain about it. Whereas Conte, Mourinho, obviously, they probably used it to their advantage, this kind of situation, knowing what they're like. So it was all kind of there. And back to your sort of initial point, this kind of fits in with it as well. Like, what was he like around the summer in pre-season? Yeah, we never spoke to him. And he didn't seem to want to do it. I don't think the club really wanted to either. And I guess, there's another sign, really. Like, I'll miss how reliable Harry was in mix zone after games. Same with Hugo Lloris, actually. So someone's going to have to step up, because when times were bad, those two normally fronted up and spoke to us. And he's got a very good handle on what he wants to say, and doesn't get pushed into corners by leading questions that are hoping to get a good response. He knows what he's doing. So the fact that he didn't speak at all, didn't do any interviews, but didn't do any mix zone stuff after matches, felt like another sign looking back now, and that was likely to happen. There was one event, back to what I was saying about Eric Dyer, that Dyer event that I was at, which was at a children's charity in Singapore. Sorry, I was going to say Thailand. Singapore. There were quite a few players there. I think Alfie Whiteman was there before he got injured, sadly, and a few other guys. And they were doing these like these lovely art paintings with the kids, kind of like paint by numbers, but a bit more, slightly more to it than that. But
yeah.
And Harry was there as well. And I don't know if he knows who I am, but he probably recognised that I was maybe a journalist, mixed zones, or that he knew that press were there. And I wouldn't say like he was fine, but he was probably keeping his wanting to keep his into his own space, and he was great with the kids, answering all their questions. And one kid held up her hand to do the high five, and then as he went for it, did the old "woo," which was pretty ballsy of this 10-year-old. But he seemed fine, but throughout the whole tour, didn't seem particularly keen on speaking to the media. So it felt like that was maybe a sign. But I guess hindsight is 2020, and had he stayed, probably wouldn't be reading into these things as much as I am right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's one of those with Harry where, look, quite frankly, as you said, his intention was to go. He got his move, and obviously, of course, we move on. So you seem fairly confident, Tom, to close it. You do think generally Spurs will bring in another forward, but you're just not sure whether it will be of the higher caliber profile. But maybe one that's a prospect. Many are asking, could he be a gift? Could he be a gift, Orban? You think he could potentially be a gift?
I think that's a possibility, a gift. Yeah, it feels more likely that it will be a prospect, perhaps. But yeah, things can change. I mean, look, if Richarlison, I feel like the plan always was to go with him,
right?
And then his son obviously can play through the middle as well.
Yeah,
but I guess they've got a few games before the end of the window. Things can change, but and if a good deal comes available, then maybe things can change. But at the moment, from what I sort of understand, I think it's more likely to be the kind of striker you just described.
Okay, Tom, I normally have to let you go, and I should let you go, but there's the two obligatory questions I have to ask you on Last One on Spurs. They're mandatory, which I don't do them. I'm going to kick myself, and please forgive me. There'll be 30 seconds tops each. Number one, what do you constitute a success for Ange Postecoglou in his first season at Tottenham? And secondly, how many more players do you think Spurs are going to sign? I'm going to let you answer them in a minute, and I promise you I'll let you go. Over to you.
What constitutes successful? I think the bar is so low after the last few years. I think all the fans want is entertainment and looking like they're going in a direction that is on an upward trajectory. I think Harry leaving means that literally there are no expectations from definitely from outside of Tottenham, and I don't think there'll be huge expectations from a Spurs point of view. So if they can, personally, if they finish in Europe with the competition that there is, look at Aston Villa. I know they've just lost Mings and they've lost Buendia, but they've just spent nearly 100 million on Pau Torres and Diaby, and that's just Villa, let alone Newcastle, Man United, all the others. If they can finish 7th, or then that wouldn't be a bad, and playing good football, I think that actually be quite a good season. And that might sound a bit pessimistic to you guys. And if it all clicks, maybe, you never know, back to the Champions League. But personally, as someone a bit more dispassionate about these things, that's the way I see it. And from a transfer point of view, I would think more likely, I'm going to say 2 or 3.
Okay.
So centre back, striker, and let's have another midfielder, shall we? Let's throw that in there. But I don't know. We'll see.
So, Tom, thank you so much, mate. I've taken you way over time. There's too much love for Ange Postecoglou, and that's what it is. Lots of love for Ange. Like I say, hopefully he'll keep us talking throughout the season. Tom, you do a lot of talking, of course, on the Tottenham Way. We love you on there for that. Tell us where people can find the Tottenham Way, and also can find you personally with all your insightful knowledge that we're finding on Tottenham as well, mate. Tell us where they can find it.
So at the Tottenham Way, thanks very much for plugging it. The guys will be very happy with that. I'm sure they'll come on at some point. Tom Allnut at the Times, Dan Kirkpatrick of the Standard, and Marcus Buckland, the legendary sports TV presenter.
Amen.
Twitter is mainly where I use, so at Tom Barclay _. And then I am trying to start building my Instagram, which has a pitiful amount of followers right now, but I am starting to get finally into sort of Instagram stories. So it was easy on tour because there was loads of cool stuff, and now I'm like, well, it'll be me going to a press conference and me going to a game, me being at the stadium again. I mean, it's not going to be that interesting. So
Luton away might be an experience, Tom, that people might want to see on. That
might be more interesting. Yeah. So we'll see where we go.
Amazing, Tom. Thank you so much. Apologies for taking you over time. You've been amazing. Guys, thank you so much for all your incredible support tonight for Last Word on Spurs. And of course, throughout what's going to be a busy, busy season. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully, we'll catch up with you in January when we're firmly inside the top 4, doing really, really well in the Cups. And everything is looking delightful.
Fingers crossed. Cheers for having me, Ricky. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, mate. No, my pleasure. Guys, please keep safe, keep well. We'll be back with you as soon as you can. And as always, come on, you